Welcome to Inside the Lines, presented by BetMGM. Joined by Nick Bonaddio, I'm Olivia Harlan Dekker. Before beating TCU as a 21-point underdog, the Buffalo's odds were 100-1 to win their conference. Now they're sitting at 15-1, still the seventh best odds to win the Pac-12. Looking more macro than that even, Colorado's odds to win the national championship also made a big move, going from 300-1 when they opened, then dropped again to 150-1 after beating TCU, and now 100-1. But man, people love them. The Buffaloes have the fifth highest ticket percentage at 6.7% to win the national championship. Nick, is there still value in either one of these lines, or is it all gone since you really could have gotten them at a much higher price not that long ago?
Yeah, I mean, look, like let's get the first things out front. Like, this is an amazing story. Like, Deion Sanders, everyone questioned what he was doing. He proved us wrong, and I think he deserves credit for that. Is there value in this? I think you have to sort of separate what value means in this context. Like, is there entertainment value? There's tremendous entertainment value in the Colorado Buffaloes right now. What's going to happen? How are they going to do? And so if you're one of those bettors who just like to kind of put down a bet and watch and enjoy it as a fan, then yes, there is. If you're going by the numbers, if you're looking for ROI, I would say no. No one really knows what this Colorado team actually is going to do. I think TCU a little bit of a paper tiger. Colorado underperformed relative towards expected points, relative towards, like in a lot of ways, they should have lost that game in terms of their efficiency and how they did. And so I think you can't really expect Colorado to play that way. You certainly can't expect Hunter to play both sides and play 109 snaps. And so I think purely from the ROI perspective, I would say no.
If you had to go between Pac-12 odds and national championship odds, though, it seems like Pac-12 odds look a little bit better. Obviously, it was a great opening weekend. No one lost. In fact, USC already has 2 wins. They started a week early. But the Trojans and Huskies are AP top 10, and USC plays Colorado end of September. Do you have to get through September before you really think of Colorado as a contender?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think your point is well made. I think if you are wanting to get a position on Colorado, you should do it inside of the Pac-12. USC, obviously a strong program, but USC isn't Georgia, right? USC is in Alabama. I think you can make more of a salient case in your head that Colorado can go in and beat USC, can beat Utah. Washington, I think, is probably more difficult than people think, but I like that side of it more than I can try to convince myself that Colorado could go all the way into the CFP and knock off a Georgia, knock off an Alabama. That's a bridge too far for me.
Of course, a big part of the Colorado discussion are these star players. They really have 3, but there are 2 that are in the Heisman conversation. First, former top recruit and two-way player Travis Hunter. He played over 100 snaps last week. He had over 100 receiving yards and a pick. And he's actually the most bet player to win the Heisman Trophy at plus 2,500. By the way, he opened at plus 15,000. And then coach's son, star quarterback Shedeur Sanders. By now you've heard he's passed for over 500 yards versus TCU. Second most bet player at plus 3,300. And those have shortened significantly after that week 1 performance at plus 12,500. So that's 2 from the same team. It's incredible. Nick, which one would you prefer to wager on? Do you think it's the right time to even place this bet?
Yeah, I mean, if I was forced to choose one between the 2, I'd probably choose Shedeur Sanders, just on the basis of, on quarterback. Certainly his numbers were ridiculous against TCU. You have to give him credit for that. You can't expect Travis Hunter to play 2 ways the way he did, certainly not, over the course of a 12-game, 13-game season. So I think if you had to get into a pick you want to get on Shedeur Sanders, is there value in either one? A little bit. I think if you wanted to get a little bit of a sprinkle on Shedeur Sanders, I think that's fine. I think a lot of the favorites, your Marvin Harrison Juniors, underperformed in week 1. And I think that's going to change, but that doesn't, mean that Shedeur Sanders didn't perform the way he did. And so I think if you were going to go someplace, I'd go Sanders, but it's, a lot of that value has been stripped off. I think, if you are buying either one of them right now, you are buying pretty high. And typically that's not a great formula for success.
Right. And it is traditionally more of a quarterback award. Since 2000, 82% of the winners have been a quarterback. But I'm curious, does it hurt that they're on the same team? Obviously, we've seen it happen before with top 10 finishes, but rarely is it the winner and a teammate.
Yeah, it's unusual. Like normally I consider myself to be like a geek, and I'll be able to kind of pull up the last time there were two finalists from the same team. I can't remember off the top of my head, so it couldn't have been recently, unless it is recently, and then someone's going to find me on Twitter and make fun of me.
Nope.
But
It's been a while.
it's been a while. Good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't hurt them in the sense of like, look, what's good for one is going to be good for the other. If Shedeur Sanders throws for 500 yards and some upset victory over Washington, that's going to be good for Travis Hunter too, and vice versa. So I don't think it works against them, but I don't think it helps them either. It's not necessarily your classic correlation case where you've got a quarterback and a wide receiver or something like that, where both people are putting up crazy numbers, like a Caleb Williams, Jordan Addison kind of thing last year. So yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't work against them, but it doesn't help them all that much either.
We've talked a lot about USC, by the way. That was a couple of the situations with Matt Leinart. 2 different times. It was himself and a teammate who went to New York. But look, we got to switch to the NFL. It's week 1. Let's take a look at some of the most popular bets in the NFL this week. The most bet spreads. You can see Jaguars, Commanders, public loving them, both over 85%. It's also no surprise that the public is siding with the defending NFC champs. Which spread do you want to fade the public on, Nick?
I would fade the Bengals -2.5. I would certainly love to fade it at -3. I think, 2.5, like there's a reason why it's 2.5 and not 3. But I think, without having more information about Joe Burrow's status, is he practicing in full? And yes, he's a little bit of a veteran in some sense. He doesn't need to practice in the same way, but, he's going to be rusty. I think the Browns are a much improved team. And let's face it, Deshaun Watson couldn't be as bad as he was last year. It'd be very surprising for me to believe that he won't be better. Elijah Moore, upgrade at wide receiver 2. Nick Chubb, I think, is going to gash some pretty big holes in the Bengals defense. And I think, just from all those things, I think you can't look at the Bengals and say they're going to definitively cover that line. So I think, I get why the public's on it. The Bengals, yeah. It's Joe Burrow. And on the other side, it's the Browns. And as a Steelers fan, I have to sort of like maybe be a little bit, cautious in the way I talk about the Browns. But I do like the Browns here against the public.
You mentioned the Bengals defense. They're replacing a lot of starters on that side of the ball. So I think there are some holes, like you mentioned. I'm with you. I like the Browns +2.5 in what I think will be a very defensive, tough divisional game. Cleveland's defense has improved. They've got Zadarius Smith, Myles Garrett, Dalvin Tomlinson. They just signed him for 4 years. So they're clearly investing. They might even get Denzel Ward back from concussion protocol on the back end. So I like this one. I think the public might need to take a better look at who's playing. Let's continue this theme, but switch to totals. So the most bet totals, we have Panthers, Falcons. That's under 39.5. That's pretty low. We mentioned Chiefs last night. They were the highest of the weekend, but typically the public is backing overs. In this case, we have 3 unders on the list with the Panthers, Falcons. That one leading the way at 77%. Which of these totals would you fade the public on?
I'd probably fade the Dolphins Chargers over 51. I think that's a very big number for week 1. That's a lot of points to put up. Typically, you'll see totals rising over the course of the season just because teams get a little more fluid. They get more locked into their identity. Week 1, you're still a little rusty. You're adjusting to game pace. And so 51 points is a lot of points. And look, both those teams can score points. It's not a question of me fading on one of those defenses. This is purely that number is high enough. 27-24, that's a big point spread to cover to get to. I think I can see a world where, the Dolphins feed Raheem Mostert. They kind of take a little bit of air out of the ball. I could see a world where Eckler, just grinds away 10 carries, 5 receptions, just, small receptions to get to 51. I think you got to have a lot of explosive plays. And I don't necessarily see that from either one of these teams other than Tyreek Hill.
What's the analytical approach to betting point totals as the season progresses? Do you block off the season into chunks?
Yeah, I mean, I think you start to look at how teams are trending over time. I think, as I said, totals will get higher over the course of the season. You'll get more information about how teams are looking relative towards expectation. Are they adding expected points? What's their success rate? How efficient are they? And then you'll start to see a little bit of a divergence. It won't be a 3-point divergence. It'll be a half point here, a point here, but you'll start to see the public getting more on overs as the season goes. And then typically near the mid-season and late season, there's going to be value on the unders, particularly against public teams.
Now let's do the opposite. Of the games that the public is high on, which one are you most confident that these people are going to win and have a great week 1?
I think it's the Commanders. And look, I typically abhor betting a -7 line. Like that's the one that's a lot of points, and two, like you'd much rather it at 6.5 versus 7. This is purely on the basis of I think the Cardinals are the worst team in the league. I think they're very clearly tanking. I think, I mean, is Josh Dobbs legitimately an NFL quarterback? I would probably say no. You're going into Washington, the culture's changed there. McLaurin, Jahan Watson, like they've got weapons. I think, the fan base in Washington is eager and is going to be, so happy to turn the page from Dan Snyder. And I think that, 7 is a large number, but I can't see the Cardinals really putting up much of a fight in that game. I would be worried about the backdoor cover. If you want to tease it down to 6.5 and buy the half point just to protect yourself against the backdoor cover, I think that's sensible. But I think the Commanders win this game pretty heavily.
I'm with you on this. I'm with the public on this. It's a new day in the DMV. There's new ownership, fresh start, new offensive coordinator from Kansas City and Bieniemy. And then on the field, they're hopeful to get star receiver Terry McLaurin back. He has turf toe. That can be a sneaky injury, though. That can linger. And they might even get defensive end Chase Young. So it affects a lot when you look at those two stars on both sides of the ball. But I'm with you. I think they can run away with this one. How high would you take it up to?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think 7's about as high as I would go, because like
Okay.
really, 7 versus 7.5, there isn't a ton of difference other than you're going to push if it's a 7-point game, obviously. I'd keep it at 7. To your point about Terry McLaurin, I think that's a great point. I think turf toe is a sneaky injury. Jahan Dotson, though, I think is a really, really undervalued player, and there really isn't that much drop off between the two. And so I think, if you're still one of those people who's doing those real late fantasy drafts and you're still getting into it, Jahan Dotson, I think he's a bit of a popular pick, and so I'm not necessarily surprising anyone. But I think Jahan Dotson is primed for a breakout, and if Terry McLaurin is sidelined in any way, I think you're going to see Jahan Dotson go nuts.
So our good friend John Ewing over at BetMGM tweeted this out the other day. It's pretty good. Let's put up a full screen. Since 2005, division underdogs in week 1 have gone 64, 44, and 2. That's 59% against the spread per Bet Labs. So as we look at week 1, division dogs, and you can browse through that. Browns plus 2.5, we already talked about. I gotta admit, one sticks out to me, Packers plus 1. And I am a homer. That is my team, but I think that's a pretty nice number. Jordan Love getting some nice reports out of camp. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, they're dealing with hamstring injuries, but they sat out Wednesday. I think a lot of people make too much of who's playing Wednesday practice. I don't think that matters. They'll be good to go. I feel confident, and the Packers will play well at Soldier Field. That's my pick on that list. What do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a super strong opinion. I mean, obviously, like I felt the best about the Browns, and we talked about it already. I think if you want to look at another game, I think the Jets plus 3 is an interesting pick. Or excuse me, the Giants. I'm sorry. Like I'm getting my own games. Like I live in New York. I've got MetLife on the brain. I'm thinking the Giants versus the Cowboys is an interesting game. There's going to be some weather situation here, and so I think that lends itself to Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller kind of game. I think Daniel Jones is a lot better than most people think, and I think MetLife is going to be rocking. I don't think it's as trivial as Dak Prescott and Tony Pollard just waltz in New York and steamroll. I think that plus 3 for the Giants is a pretty interesting number, particularly if the weather gets a little bit shaky. I probably no bet on it, but if I had to pick a game other than the Browns, I think the Giants is a pretty interesting home dog against the Cowboys.
Okay, division underdogs, week 1, 59% win percentage. I like that. That's a good number. You already mentioned a primetime game, so let's get into primetime props. We're each going to share our favorite prop in one of the primetime games. Nick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think, the primetime game between the Giants and the Cowboys is a pretty interesting one for a variety of reasons. I'm interested to see how Darren Waller is going to fit into the Giants offense. Look, the Giants don't have a lot of great receiving options. And I think if I'm the Cowboys, I'm going to take away the one receiving threat that they have, and that's Darren Waller. And so I think from the Giants, you're going to see a lot of Saquon Barkley. You're going to see a lot of, possession, a lot of time control. I don't really like Darren Waller this week. I think maybe he has a ceiling of 3 catches, 4 catches. So he would have to break one for a pretty large gain to get over 51.5. I think that game is much more of a, slower pace game. I just don't like Darren Waller in this situation. The Cowboys, pretty strong. The secondary, pretty strong. And linebackers last year, very, very strong against tight ends. I think they're going to game plan against Darren Waller, and it's hard for me to see how he gets to this number even in a primetime situation.
Okay, I like it. I like a new player on a new team. I'm going to America's team. Dak Prescott, over 237 and a half passing yards. I believe that just went down to that number today. He hit that in 4 of the last 5 regular season games he's played. If you look out at a larger sample size, 8 of the last 10 games. And he also hit that against the Giants in November. I think it's a safe number for him. And he might be playing with a little chip on his shoulder with Trey Lance in the quarterback room now. Do you agree with that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a low number. I think Dak Prescott clearly has the weapons around him. He clearly has the talent. I think whether this game, like whether that prop goes over or not, is really dependent on the game flow. If the Giants, and we've talked about liking the Giants a lot in this situation, if the Giants do start to put up some points and play a little more up tempo and do give the Cowboys a really competitive game, then Dak Prescott is going to have to throw the ball. I think Tony Pollard, coming out of the backfield without Zeke around, he's a receiving threat. I could easily see him putting up 20, 30, 40 receiving yards. And so if you add up all those weapons, your CeeDee Lambs, I think 237, provided there isn't anything weird, no weather, no injuries, anything like that, I think 237, I feel good about the over in that situation too.
Right. The only thing that did give me pause is that Dak does worse on the road and outside. So I'm upset that you brought that one up because it made me second guess myself a little bit. Look, before we wrap up the episode, we're going to give you our blue chip bets, aka our best bets. Anything that we love. It can be spread, money line, total, prop, whatever. Nick, what is your blue chip bet?
I have two. I think the first one I really like is North Carolina to win the ACC. Florida State had a great game, but North Carolina was just as impressive. They finally figured out the defense. Drake May, the best quarterback in the conference, where it sits right now, anywhere from plus 25 to plus 650. That implies that North Carolina is only the best team in the ACC 10%, 15% of the time. I think that's much more likely to be the case. And so I think there's significant value in North Carolina winning the ACC. Now, the second one, I'm a big tennis fan. Right now, US Open, we're right in the thick of it. For as great of a story as Ben Shelton is, you're still talking about someone who's playing challenger matches as recently as 3 months ago. And now you're going up against the second best player of all time, and you're asking him to compete. I think Djokovic wins that pretty handily. Ben Shelton would have to play the match of his life to even get a set there. And so I think that Novak Djokovic, shutting him out for as much as a fan as I want Ben Shelton to be competitive, I just don't see it in that match.
I like the variety you're giving us, but I'm going back to the NFL. It's week 1, baby, and we have 3 rookie quarterbacks. This time last year, we had 0. So let's go to Indianapolis. Colts starting quarterback is Anthony Richardson from Florida, and I like over 42 and a half rushing yards. I would take that to almost 50, actually. I think they'll have some designed runs for him to get comfortable, and I'm sure he'll also be scrambling a lot early, kind of taking off at the first sign of pressure, and he can really go, as we saw at Florida. So he only needs a couple carries to get that number. Everyone, enjoy your first week of the NFL. Thanks so much for joining us for this first episode. We'll see you back, same time, same place next week.